I want to introduce our speaker for tonight. His name is Joshua M. Greene. What can I say about Joshua Prabhu, Yogesvara Prabhu? He's such an amazing person. But just to give you guys just a few big highlights of his life, he was a monk for 13 years. And then he returned. He spent many years in India, Europe, and of course, America. And he came back to America and became a professor of religion, Hinduism, and Holocaust history at Hofstra University in New York. And he's written 3 books, by the way. And one of those books is what we're going to be talking about tonight. It's called Swami in a Strange Land. It's the biography of a spiritual teacher, a very powerful personality of the yoga tradition. He also wrote a book about George Harrison's spiritual journey. And yeah, he does a lot of stuff. He teaches at yoga studios, at universities, schools. He's a spiritual guide, a mentor. He's written a book on the Bhagavad Gita. Some of you have copies of the Bhagavad Gita. He's written a translation as well as a book with a commentary on an explanation of the Bhagavad Gita, the ancient wisdom of India. So that's sort of the biographical information about him. I'd like to just share a few personal words because, you know me, I don't like doing the sort of by the script introductions. I met him about 2 years ago, and I was serving as a monk at a center in Manhattan in the Lower East Side for a few months, and he would come and give these talks. And believe me, when I first heard him speak, I used to be really impressed because I really didn't think it was possible for someone in New York City to sound this relaxed and this together and this sweet and this friendly. New York was a really intense atmosphere for me. I was a monk there for 4 months, and believe me, it took every ounce of my just sort of patience and sort of sensitivity to survive New York. I could only do it for a couple of months. They asked me to stay back, and they said, we'll even give you you can even share a room with someone. I was like, that sounds good, but I can't do New York. It's like being in a pressure cooker. So, but he's been there for years, and I don't know how he did it. It was so impressive. I would hear him speak, and I would think to myself, who is this person, and how can he be so calm and collected and clear in his thinking? It was always so impressive. And we actually went out to lunch, and I got to pick his brain a little bit and learn more about his life. And I've always had this desire to have him on Thoughtful Thursdays. The reason why we have him speak about this topic tonight, I just want to give a brief introduction to this topic. We're going to hear about the life of a truly magnificent personality in the yoga tradition of India. He came to the West in the 60s, wrote over 70 books on Bhakti Yoga. At the age of 70 years old, started a worldwide movement, a really powerful person. I want to give it all away. We're going to hear all about that today from Joshua. But the reason why I wanted to have this discussion tonight is because I think we're all trying to grow spiritually. And what really helps us the most in spiritual life is good examples, right? You look at the kids in school, the kids who misbehave are the ones who look at the bad examples. And the kids who do really well, they're the ones who are hanging out with the good kids, right? Karen, you have a son, and I'm sure you're very careful who he hangs out with, right? You don't want your son hanging out with the kids who are doing the things they're not supposed to be doing. You know what I mean, right? Because, they'll look up to that, right? They'll emulate that example. So in spiritual life, as in everything in life, emulation is a very powerful principle. When we see something we can look up to and sort of embody, that really inspires us to the core of our being. So we want to hear about great persons like that because it'll inspire us. Also, yesterday was this person's birthday, the person who we'll hear about tonight. Yesterday was actually his birthday. And he left the world about 40 years ago, but still to this day, he's remembered and sort of, he's remembered and praised for his contributions to the world of spirituality, yoga, and things of that sort. So without further ado, I will pass it on now to Joshua, who I'm very, very excited to hear from you tonight. Prabhu, would you like to just do a quick mic check so make sure your audio is coming through clearly?
Sure. Does it all sound good if I speak at this level?
Fantastic. Sounds great.
All right, great. Thank you, Hari, for that bombastic introduction. I'll try to live up to that and not disappoint you. Welcome, and thank you so much. I'm delighted to meet you all, albeit through the miracle of pixelated digital technology. This is for me a very exciting topic to be talking about. I turned 70 in June, and when I met my teacher, the subject of our discussion this evening, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, students and well-wishers and followers called him by his honorific title, Prabhupada. Prabhu in Sanskrit means master, pada means feet. So that person at whose feet others gathered to learn spiritual wisdom. So when I speak of Prabhupada, I'm speaking of my teacher, Bhaktivedanta Swami, who is remembered as the founder of the Krishna movement, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. He was a scholar and a bhakta. A bhakta means a lover of God. And there are a few of us still around who had the great good fortune of knowing him personally. That's been the great treasure of my life, was having had the opportunity to know him, be with him face to face, ask him questions, travel with him. And in the dark times, to be very candid with you, those memories of being with him have sustained me. I think possibly even at times saved my life. So I'll do my best to convey to you what it was like to be with a saint, with a God-realized soul, a lover of God. But in order for me to be able to give you an impression of why Prabhupada is an important figure in the spiritual history of the world and why it might be worth your time to learn more about him, I have to go back just a little bit and give you some of the context described in the ancient Sanskrit texts. The Sanskrit texts, sometimes called the Vedic texts, are the scriptures of India, and it's the largest single library of teachings in the world. There are thousands of the Vedic Sanskrit texts, and they conform in their fundamental teachings with the mystic traditions of all world faith cultures. If you go to the Kabbalah of Judaism, or to the Christian mystic teachings, or if you study the works of the Sufi mystics in Islam, you'll find this uniformity of ideas. What is that central idea that runs through all of the mystic traditions? The idea is as follows. Anything that we say lives, if we say there's life there, whether it's a human being or an animal, a plant, a butterfly, a mosquito, a flower, whatever it may be, there is a spark of God present there. In Sanskrit, the word is jiva atma, individual, usually translated as soul. That spark is different from the physical housing. Bodies are like vehicles that carry us around. We are different from the body we inhabit. The spark that animates the body with consciousness is not born of a combination of material elements. That's the physicalist scientific idea that at some point in historic time, life, consciousness is generated from the interaction of wave functions and molecules and subatomic particles and different cosmic forces. There's never been any conclusive evidence that life is generated by matter. And in the mystic texts, and in particular the Bhakti texts of India, consciousness is described as coming from a very different nature from matter. It's a separate phenomenon altogether that's typified by three qualities. In Sanskrit, Sat, Chit, and Ananda. Sat means eternal. The nature of all life is eternal. We come into a material body that sustains us for some time. When death occurs, the self does not die. The self transmigrates to another body according to the consciousness that we develop within this lifetime. The body that we inhabit now, the body that you're living in, the body that I'm living in, was created over the course of previous lives by our thoughts, desires, ambitions, actions, deeds, words, hopes, fears. That subtle context becomes physically manifested in our next life. So how we behave now determines where we will transmigrate to in our next lifetime. The second quality of the jivatma, or the individual self within the body, is chit. Chit means fully self-aware. In our original constitutional nature, we are filled with knowledge, filled with wisdom, filled with light. When we come into a material body, that gets covered over. The third quality is ananda. Ananda means that we are joyful. By nature, living beings are joy-seeking, pleasure-seeking creatures. There's a fourth quality that's not always emphasized, but it's equally as important, and that word is vigraha. Sat Chit Ananda Vigraha. Vigraha means endowed with form. The individual soul is qualitatively one with the Supreme Soul. There are two schools in India. One is called the Advaita Vedanta school, which says that we are ourselves God. And when you come to the fulfillment of your meditation, the flowering of your yoga, you understand that you become God. You were God, now you are again God. There's another school, which is the Bhakti school, that says that's already true qualitatively. The individual soul and the supreme Brahman from which everything is constituted are already by nature the same qualitatively, just as a drop of ocean water shares the same chemical composition as the vast ocean itself. Quantitatively, a drop of water never equals the vast mass of ocean water. Qualitatively, God remains great, and we individual souls are small or minute. But that doesn't diminish the beauty of the soul. In fact, it enhances the beauty of the soul. It is by retaining individuality that love can occur. For love to happen, there needs to be two, the lover and the beloved. So the Bhakti school describes that there is this oneness with God qualitatively, but the self also retains its irreducible, unique individuality, and that's how love is allowed to occur. So the question may arise, if that's the nature of the self, why leave the eternal realm? Why come into this world of birth and death and sickness and old age? How many of you are dealing with an elderly person right now, maybe a parent or a grandparent? Can I see by a show of hands? Yeah, there's a lot of hands going up there. Well, my mother's 94, and we talk about this all the time. She's very sanguine about accepting that she's not her body. She may not use words like soul or super soul, but she has this almost intuitive idea that there's something more than this one lifetime. And I think every one of us here in this discussion can share that impulse, that there's something to us that is more than just the physicality of our life. The traumas of our life do not define who we are. We have them, but they are not who we are. They're external to our true eternal self. So this idea runs through all of the mystic traditions. And according to the Sanskrit texts, the human journey is to reawaken this knowledge of ourselves as eternal beings, to return to that original beautiful state of eternity, bliss, and knowledge. Well, how does that happen? Well, it happens through the intermediary of wisdom texts, scriptures, the realizations of great souls over the generations that have been codified in written form. This is the true meaning of scripture. It's not meant as a controlling device, but as a liberating device, something that allows us to study our original nature. It also happens in the form of teachers. Hari mentioned earlier that it's important to find a teacher who can guide us on our spiritual journey. The spiritual journey is not something that you can just dabble with or invent on your own. There are paths that have been chalked out over the course of history that are tried and true. They've survived the test of time. And a qualified teacher, a true guru, is someone who is a master in that particular path and who can therefore guide you and answer your questions. So finding a teacher is a very important part of spiritual life. My great fortune was to find a teacher when I was all of the ripe old age of 19. I was a student at the Sorbonne in Paris, and was told by a disciple of Prabhupada, you know, you should go to London. Our teacher is there now, and it's very rare to meet a pure devotee of God, a lover of God. So you should go. You should go and meet him. Well, this young fellow, whose name was Wali, his spiritual name is Umapati, had a shaved head. So I'm thinking to myself, well, I don't know. If I go and I get interested in this bhakti yoga thing, I might end up looking like him. So I don't think I'm going to go. I didn't want to shave my head. But eventually I did, because he got me really interested in what this was all about. And I got to London on the boat train. This was 1969, December. Most of you were still in your last lifetime. So I get to London, and I go to this beautiful little building off Oxford Street. And I walk in the door. And the first thing that happens, there's this young woman who's coming down a stairway wearing this gossamer, beautiful sari. That's, when I opened the door, the wind blew her sari. So there's this angelic creature coming down the stairs. And I'm thinking, okay, so far, so good. Then I went downstairs and they were serving this beautiful vegetarian lunch. And I'm thinking, so far, so good. And I start talking with them and they say, so tell us about yourself. And I say, well, I'm a student and I play organ in a rock band in college. And their eyes got big. They say, you play organ? Yeah. Come with us. So we barrel up the stairs. We pack into, it was a Volkswagen minibus. You probably don't know this because they've been banned now from the roads. The Volkswagen minibus was probably the most dangerous vehicle ever invented. In any case, there was a bunch of us crammed into this Volkswagen minibus. And I said, where are we going? So this one devotee said to me, oh, well, congratulations, you're in Krishna's band now. I had no idea what he meant. About 10 minutes later, we show up, the door opens, and we're in this beautiful, elegant street, and we're in front of a building, and there's a number 3 on the door. And I'm thinking to myself, this is 3 Savile Row. This is Beatles headquarters. Now, if you're not of a certain age, shall we say, you don't understand how incredibly important the Beatles were to those of us who grew up in the 60s. They were our wise men, they were our sages, they were our bards, they were our teachers, they were our exemplars. If they were into it, we wanted to be into it. That was it. If the Beatles are into it, we wanted to know what it was. So we walk into the building, and sure enough, there's this big green apple, which was the Beatles business logo, Apple Studios logo. And we go downstairs, and there's George Harrison standing there. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, if I stay with these people, I get God and the Beatles. Okay, I'm in. This was really good. This was really, really good. So we ended up recording an album, which you can still find. It's called the Radha Krishna Temple. And my big claim to fame, never mind the degrees and teaching in universities or whatever. Oh, you recorded with the Beatles. Whoa, whoa. And the album is called the Radha Krishna Temple. And it was George Harrison's recording of Indian devotional music. It's beautiful. What was extraordinary about it was the simplicity with which he approached it. He wasn't trying to impress anybody with his musical skills. He just allowed the music to flow. It's a very beautiful album. In any case, shortly after, I was initiated by Prabhupada, the founder of the Krishna movement, who was also George Harrison's teacher. And it was about a year later that I met Prabhupada for the first time. Here's what I can tell you, because it's difficult to pack the life of a living saint into such a short space of a few minutes. I can tell you that I know that God is real, that Krishna is real, because I have witnessed his pure devotee's love for him. Prabhupada exuded love of God. Everything he did was an offering of love to Krishna. Everything we talked about, no matter where we started, it could have been the most everyday of topics. Within the space of a minute, he would bring the conversation around to Krishna. It was Krishna, 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 Krishna. Everything about him was moved, motivated, energized by his love for God. And through that love, I witnessed his love for every living being. And it was something to see how even irate people, sometimes people would come to see him and they would try to strut their knowledge. They would, oh, I know Sanskrit, so they'd recite verses or talk about their philosophy or whatever. He was very, very patient. I remember one man who came to see him in Paris, who got up and started really just pontificating. Krishna, Bhagavad Gita, this says that, and the other thing. And I'm thinking to myself, why is Prabhupada being so patient with him? He should just ask him to leave. You know, he's being obnoxious. But Prabhupada just sat very quietly until finally this man said something about Krishna saying in the Bhagavad Gita that one can come to know me truly as I am through love and devotion. And Prabhupada's eyes got big. He said, yes, 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 you have spoken very nicely. And he took that one little point of contact with the actual message of the Bhagavad Gita, and he blew it up till it filled the entire canvas of their conversation. And this man, who could have been feeling quite disrespected if someone had said, please stop and go away now, was feeling appreciated. That's an amazing skill, to be able to take an antithetical situation and turn it around so that you make of an adversary a friend. That's the real meaning of spiritual life. And that's what it was like being with Prabhupada. He had grown up in a very religious family. He was from a Brahminical family born in Calcutta in 1896, and had never left India. He came to America at the age of, he was 69. He turned 70 on this boat, this cargo boat that came to America. And he suffered 2 heart attacks on the way over here. He had literally no money. His teacher had asked him to bring knowledge of Krishna and the bhakti tradition to the West. And he tried for many years in India. It didn't work. Finally, he realized the clock is ticking. So he got on that cargo boat and came to America. And at the ripe old age of 70, started a movement that has now taken root in every country of the world. And I don't know that there's any place where someone hasn't heard the chanting of the Krishna mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And that was Prabhupada who brought that chanting to the West. So I could go on for days talking about him because every moment with him was filled with meaning and wisdom and knowledge. But I think rather than taking up all the time, I'd love to hear from you. I'd like to hear if you have questions about it, and I'll answer you as best I can.
You know, there is Prabhupada the person that you spoke a lot about, what it was like to be in his presence, his personality, his candor, his sweetness, And there was also him as the spiritual teacher, the founder of a movement that within a span of just 10 years, he was able to set up over 100 centers around the world. He wrote over 70 books. He had thousands of disciples. He managed to personally handwrite so many letters on a daily basis. And you were, personally with him for many years, I believe in Paris and other places. You saw that happen. You saw how he, in those days, before email, text messaging, WhatsApp, he managed to run a worldwide society and not just inspire people in an organizational sense, but in a deeply spiritual sense. I think one of the fears that at least I have growing up in this world is whenever you organize something like spirituality, you might lose its essence, right? We always have this fear that something, when you organize religion or spirituality, and you have this feeling that what if it loses its essence? So how was he able to create something so vast and organizationally relevant in this world, but at the same time touch people with that spirit of why are we really doing it, and not lose that essence? How was he able to do it? This has always been a question for me that I've had for years. Maybe you could shed some light on that.
He accomplished what he did because he had no selfish interest. There wasn't anything that he did, said, thought, felt, conveyed to others that was intended for his own. He was, the Sanskrit word is Atmarama, meaning content within himself. However difficult it was, and in the very early years, it was before hundreds of temples and millions of books being distributed and sold, and before there were farms and vegetarian restaurants and projects, Rath Yatra festivals in every major city of the globe, before there was that international institution, it was just him in a small storefront on 2nd Avenue in New York City, in the Bowery of all places. Very, very difficult conditions. He did not have a sponsor. He didn't have wealth behind him. He didn't have contacts or influence or some kind of political power machine behind him. It was just him and his love of God. And he came, one thing he said that just first time I heard it just stuck in my heart and it's never left there. He said, thousands of stars cannot light up the sky at night. One moon can light up the sky. I don't need to have thousands of disciples, followers, students. Give me one moon-like disciple, and I will sit with that person under a tree and teach him everything about Krishna. So for himself, his ambitions were quite modest, but he had been given an order by his spiritual master, and he gave himself to that order, body and soul. There's, how to say this? There is the empiric part of the world we live in, the part we can see and touch and feel and quantify and research and study and analyze and embed in formulas and in equations. And then there's the invisible dimension. There's the mystery of the universe and the mystery of our lives here. And that part is just as real, if not more so, than what we can quantify about our lives. And externally, from all the evidence and all the indicators, Prabhupada should have stopped. He should have stopped and gone back to India. He arrived here in September of 1965 in the harshest winter in 50 years in this country. He had on a thin cloth dhoti and thin rubber shoes that he was wearing. He had no protection. Somebody donated a coat to him. And he sat down in a park bench in Tompkins Square Park, huddled against the cold. And a man who was working for the Postal Service came and sat down next to him and saw that he was from India. and asked him about himself. And Prabhupada, who was trying to keep body and soul together by distributing some of the books that he'd translated into English. He brought a chest full of English language books that he had printed at great difficulty before he came here. So he had barely anything to eat at all. And the man said, "So tell me about yourself." And he says, "I've come and I'm the teacher of an organization that has centers around the world. And there are many hundreds of thousands of followers." And the man's looking at him saying, "Really?" He said, "Right now?" And Prabhupada looked at him and said, "Time only separates us." So he had that faith, in the greater mystery, that even though the evidence may suggest that this is impossible, love is still the greatest force in the universe. And by the strength of his love for Krishna, the impossible happened.
That's a beautiful answer. It really touches the heart. I think there's Athena has a question she may want to ask. Athena, do you want to make a comment or ask you a question like by unmuting yourself, or would you like to type it in? What do you prefer?
I'm unmuted, and I apologize for the background noise. But Hare Krishna Yogesvara. Oh, sorry?
We love it. It sounds so nice.
Yes, it's a beautiful piano playing in the background. But Yogesvara Prabhu, Hare Krishna, Dandavat Pranams. I just have to say, I'm getting a healthy dose of you this whole week. I saw your Monks podcast with Chaitanya Charan Prabhu. I thought it was so impactful and so powerful. Highly recommend it to others on this channel. I had the Krishna's mercy that I was also able to hear you at the Tuaco channel on Sunday night. And you just had these wonderful memories as well as Srila Prabhupada. And following up on some of the things that you had mentioned, on Sunday Night Sangha, you had mentioned that as the generations become a little more distant from Prabhupada himself physically, becomes this more mystical figure. And your stories really make him really human in one sense and real. And it's so touching to hear those stories. But I'm curious, a couple of things. If one day all of the disciples of Srila Prabhupada leave, what is the greatest teaching that you would want these younger generations to remember about bhakti, about Srila Prabhupada's greatest teachings for the generations to come? And then personally, you have to say just one memory that will stick with you at the time that you're leaving about Srila Prabhupada. What would that be? Thank you so much for your wonderful knowledge and your association. It is such an honor to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Just real quick, before you answer the question, I want to contextualize Athena's question for those of you who are not familiar with the context she's creating. But the context is that Prabhupada left the world almost 40 years ago, and the number of people who were his direct students are reducing in numbers. So Joshua Prabhu here is one of his direct students, and there's only a few of them left on earth now, maybe like what, 200 or 300, I don't know the exact number, but there's not so many. And so Athena's question really is, once that day comes when all those who knew him directly and personally have left, then what is the key teaching? What is the key idea that this generation of those who had direct contact with a living great teacher would want the next generation to sort of follow and learn? And also, if there's a personal memory of Prabhupada that he as a student would, really cherishes and keeps in his heart, maybe it's too personal, or at least one of those memories that he wants to share with the group. So just wanted to give everyone that context for the question. So Prabhu, please go ahead.
Throughout history, great souls come into the world to revitalize something that's there within each of us. What's happening in yoga, and in particular bhakti or devotional yoga, is that there's nothing being imposed here. It's a rekindling of what's already existing in our hearts. This is something that's natural to every living being. That Satchidananda nature we talked about earlier, that's the original qualities of all living beings. Where through yoga, meditation, contemplative practice, chanting of mantras, particularly the Hare Krishna mantra, that original knowledge of ourselves as divine beings reawakens. It comes back up to the surface. It's there in us. It's not something that you acquire from outside, like a college degree, you know, where you get knowledge that you didn't have. This is something that's already there in each and every being. So what is it that not just Prabhupada, but all of the great teachers, what is it that they come to do? They don't come to position themselves as the end all and be all. They come to offer inspiration. They want us to know that in this moment and forever, you are beautiful, you are complete, you are an immortal being whom no one and nothing can harm. And that if you step back away from the fears and the uncertainties and the self-doubts that assail us at every moment, because it is a cold, cruel world out there. If you can step back far enough through breathing, through chanting, through remembrance of our true self, you will find that you are capable of doing so much more than you think yourself capable of doing. There are two things that I've learned from Prabhupada's teachings, and in particular his commentary on Bhagavad Gita. One is never judge anything by its appearance. Appearances are very deceiving. There's always more going on than meets the eye. The story that you are involved with is complex and rich with meaning, and never judge it by appearances. Don't judge things by their surface. Take a deep breath. This is where your yogic breathing comes in very powerful and very effective. You come up against that moment of tension, that moment of confrontation. Remember, there's more going on than just what you're reacting to emotionally and viscerally. So breathe into it, because there's a deeper story there. And remember the second thing. In that moment, you, as an eternal spirit soul, are capable of more than you can ever imagine. Your spiritual practice is an empowerment to achieve your heart's deepest wishes. It takes practice and it takes time. But this is the message that Prabhupada brought. This is the message that all the great teachers try to convey to the world. We are sparks of God caught up in this illusory environment where we think ourselves to be products of matter, bodies, old, young, white, black, rich, poor, Russian, American. We are those things for some time, but that's not our true self. Our true self is an eternal spark of God. And imagine waking up in the morning every day from that starting point, that I am beautiful, I am perfect. There is nothing that can hold me down because I am not the product of matter. I have a loving relationship with Krishna, the Supreme Being, and that is the source of my strength and my inspiration. And now, because I know that nothing can hurt me, let me serve the moment. Let me go into the world. Let me see what I can do for others. If you know that you're an eternal, immortal, indestructible being, what does that do for you? It frees you up to listen when others speak, so that you can be there for them. Imagine, we have those moments of doubt, of weakness, of fear. Don't you think that everybody else around you is also going through those moments, and how painful it is for them? Every one of us here on this call is being called upon to become a messenger of grace, of God's grace in the world. Learn this yourself. and then convey it to others, and just watch the magic happen. Imagine a world filled with beings who know themselves to be sparks of God, what they can do to help move things forward.
That was such a powerful answer. It reminds me also of how probably the greatest thing I've gotten from my spiritual practice is just this idea of an existential roadmap to reality. So I really loved what you said at the end, because just that awareness, that realization that when you wake up in the mornings, you realize I'm an eternal being and I have these attributes and I'm not alone in this world. That can be extremely reassuring, right? And I loved your answer, because it's true, in this world, we spend so much energy and time focusing on things like skills, like how to have a job, how to have money, how to have all these things. What people don't realize, though, is that inner satisfaction is the most valuable asset. And that doesn't come from just having things. It comes from having a meaning to our life. So I really am touched by your answer. I can't say it back as beautifully as you said it, because you said it with realizations, but I can, in my own little tiny way, I can really appreciate what you have to say. So I have here, a friend of mine is messaging on the privately. She's saying that she's so awestruck by your talk that she's trying to think of a question, but she just can't get over the words that are coming out of your mouth. She's so awestruck by that she can't even think. But there's a question here from somebody else. She says, how do you maintain and grow your faith, especially starting out? What was your fuel starting out in your spiritual life, and what role did Swami Prabhupada have in growing your faith? This is the question that's coming. Would you like to share a few words on this?
Boy, your people on this podcast, they sure expect a lot on a first date, don't they? Look, I was a lost child of the 60s, like a lot of people my age. You know, we didn't really quite know what we were getting into, which is a good thing. I think I think if we had really understood what the path of devotion meant, we would have probably ran in the opposite direction, because it is a stripping away of the ego and all of the defenses that we've built up over an entire lifetime. And sometimes that can be a rude awakening. I think that if I understand your question, you're saying, what were my expectations entering into Krishna consciousness, and how, and what did I learn from Prabhupada in those early days? Am I understanding you correctly?
The first part of the question is, how did your faith grow in spiritual life? And what role did Prabhupada play specifically in growing your faith?
Well, first of all, I didn't have any faith. I mean, I wasn't some great journeyer, you know, I know people who were looking for God. You know, I was not one of those people. I never had any interest in God at all in my life. I was bar mitzvah when I was 13, but it's, you know, in Reform Judaism, and my wife and I still go to synagogue on the high holy days. But you don't hear mystic teachings, you know, going to Shabbat service. So it was not really a part of my life. And in that sense, it was just causeless grace, you know, that I found myself in the presence of someone who just struck me. All right, here's the best way I can answer you. When I met Prabhupada and spent time with him, it became very clear very quickly, this is someone who will never hurt me. This is someone whom I never need to fear. That's rare. You know, I don't know about you guys, but I find myself, and it's embarrassing to admit this, but I find myself when I meet people thinking strategically, you know, okay, so what am I gonna get out of this? And who is this person? And how does it fit? And, you know, there's this calculating that goes on. I think I'm getting a little better after a half century of chanting, maybe a little progress. But with Prabhupada, it was eminently clear. This is someone who is not expecting to get something from me. He's giving something to me, and I can trust him. And there were times over the years when I would do things and he would chastise me, you know, but I never felt insulted or bitter. I always felt purified, you know. So even in the difficult moments, I recognize that this is someone who has my interests at heart. I felt his love for me. And I saw his love for Krishna. And I think it was seeing someone who loved God that made me believe that maybe there's a role for me in that. I'm not a religious person, even to this day. I'm really not. I generally, I don't even use the word God very often. I don't use the word religion practically at all. I find the notion of God and institutional religion kind of boring. But consciousness and the constitutional ontological nature of the self and transcendence in a position of loving exchange with the Supreme, that I'm right there. I'm fascinated by that. The idea that life in this world is reflective of its pure counterpart in an eternal realm. In the Bhagavad Gita, it's described in this way: Parastasmad tu bhava anya, vyakto vyaktat sanatana. Beyond this manifest and non-manifest material world, we're born, we die, we're born again, we die again. Beyond that provisional environment, there is parastasmad, there's para. There's this supreme abode, parastasmad tu bhava anya, this other world. Vyakto vyaktat sanatana, it is beyond that birth and death and temporary coming and going. That realm of pure consciousness, I'm there. I'm there. That's what gets me up in the morning. I want to know that. I want that. That's for me. But I'm not a religious person. I couldn't say that I'm a religious person. And that's what I got from Prabhupada, was that the spiritual journey is not a religious journey. It can be for some people, but it was never going to be that for me. And in my teacher, I found someone who was able to respond to me as someone who was not a believer, not religious, with wisdom that spoke to me of a core self that I want desperately to know. That animates me every day of my life.
Fantastic answer. Well, I just, there's a lot of comments from everything that you're sharing. A lot of people are posting comments in the chat box. People are just really getting excited and sort of enlivened about what you're saying. But I'm just looking at the time now, and we're sort of coming to an end. So I'm just going to give people 30 seconds, 45 seconds to sort of post a question if they have one for you. I thought maybe we could just use this time now real quick to share with others. I see right behind you is the cover of your book. Would you mind, I know you would never do this because you're a gentleman, but can I promote you instead? Can you please show your book to the camera for a second? Because I would love it if people were to get a copy of this on Amazon. There's 2 of them actually. So if you could just hold those both up. Wonderful pieces, wonderful works of literature and fascinating stories. I've read them both. They're great.
This is called product placement, by the way, Eric.
I'm sorry?
It's called product placement.
Exactly. But you're not doing it. It's me doing it for you, so don't worry. So the first is Swami in a Strange Land. This is the biography of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada that he wrote. And what a gripping start. I can never forget that scene, you know, on the construction site as a young boy sitting looking at the Calcutta skyline. I was like mesmerized. I was like, what a setup to start a book, Prabhu. You really blew us away. And the second one, could you please show the cover to everyone? And this is his book called Here Comes the Sun. It's the story of George Harrison's journey in spiritual life. So for any Beatles fans out there, this is a part of George Harrison's life that wasn't often so well known. It was well known to many, but everyone knew he had a spiritual side. But if you really want to get some intimate personal stories and hear more about his personal life, then feel free to check out those books. People are just typing thank yous into the chat box. There is one question that's come up 2 or 3 times now in my private. People have sent it to me privately. Everyone just really wants to know, what are your favorite experiences with Prabhupada? And I know this is probably the question you get the most because you were with him for so many years. But if there's a story or two that you'd like to leave the group with as we sort of close out the talk tonight, that you felt carried sort of maybe a personal message that everybody could learn something from, because the title of our talk today is A Life Worth Emulating. So maybe there's a personal remembrance you have where there was a quality that was shared that all of us here can sort of aspire to embody in our own life. Would you care to share that before we close out tonight's Thoughtful Thursdays?
We were on a morning walk in London in Hyde Park, 1973, perhaps 74. And Prabhupada used to brush his teeth with neem twigs. Neem trees have medicinal properties. And if you chew on the end of a neem twig, you can make little bristles and you can use that to brush your teeth. Well, there are no neem trees growing in London, but there are willow trees. And so Prabhupada asked his assistant to break off a couple of twigs from this willow tree that we passed by in Hyde Park. So his assistant broke off one little twig, then he broke off a second little twig. And he was about to break off a third twig when Prabhupada put his hands up. He said, no, don't disturb more than necessary. I'm thinking, here's someone, he's leading an international spiritual revolution. He's meeting with heads of state. He's translating ancient Sanskrit texts into books that are going out in every language of the world. He has thousands and thousands of disciples. He's opening farms and restaurants and projects and public fairs all over the place. And his concern is he doesn't want to disturb this tree more than necessary. So when we got back to the London temple, I said, Prabhupada, what does a pure devotee of God, what does a lover of God see when he looks at a tree? And Prabhupada, not wanting me to think that he considered himself to be a pure devotee or a lover of God, said, well, a pure soul, as though referring to someone else other than himself, a pure soul looks at a tree and doesn't exactly see the tree. He sees that there is a living being who, because of past lifetimes of activity, is now inhabiting a tree body. So he sees the soul that is animating that tree with life. But he doesn't stop there. He said, then he thinks, side by side with that soul, there is a Paramatma, the super soul. This is described in Bhagavad Gita. Ishvara sarvabhutanam hrideshe arjuna tishtati. Hridi means within the heart. That God as the super soul, Krishna in his localized form, lives literally, not just like some hallmark poetic idea, but literally lives in the heart of all beings. And so Prabhupada said he doesn't see just the soul, he also sees the super soul there. So instead of seeing a tree, he sees Krishna. I've never forgotten that. And that's helped me, particularly when I've been in adversarial company. I've tried to exercise that kind of spiritual vision. In the Gita, it's called Samadarshan. Pandita Samadarshanaha, the enlightened soul, sees all life on a level of equality, meaning a friend and enemy alike. I've tried to exercise that. I'm not very good at it, but that's one such moment, and there were many.
I love how you convey spiritual wisdom with so much feeling. It's really a remarkable quality you have. I feel like my brain feels alive and then my heart feels so soft and moved. So I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I can see by the comments, it's been a very nourishing, thoughtful Thursday for all who are online. Kenzie's been like taking notes and nodding the whole time. She's right next to you on my screen. So she's the one I see the most, but I'm sure everyone's feeling the same way. And so I feel personally so nourished and just blessed to have your association tonight. I feel inspired. I've posted for those of you who are online, there's a link here called gitawisdom.org. This is his direct website. So if you want to reach out to him on a personal level, if you want to have questions, if you want to follow his writings and keep track of his events, you can learn more about him as a person and as a teacher, and sort of, if you wanted to stay in touch, you can check it out. Nathan here writes, been crying a little bit the whole time. It's a tradition here, Thoughtful Thursday. Someone cries every Thursday. So this week it's Nathan. Thank you, Nathan. This happens every Thursday, and we're very proud to keep this tradition going. So yeah, but they always cry for the right reasons. Anyway, so Yogeshwar Prabhu, Joshua, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. For those of you who have joined us tonight, come back again next Thursday for next week's Thoughtful Thursday. We're starting our 4th book club in a couple of days. I will keep you posted on the details of that. We're starting another book club. For those of you who are interested in getting more connected with this community, we'll keep you posted on that, and invite your friends. We'll see you again next week. Be wise, be happy. Please take a moment after this call. I tell you this every week. Please take a moment after this call. Think for a moment of everything we've heard and experienced. Try to find something you can cull from this experience to take with you for the rest of the week. It's really important that this doesn't just become yet another thing that happens in our busy life. But if there's anything that you heard tonight from Joshua about just the purity of devotion, of love, of spirituality, about Krishna, about Prabhupada, anything you heard that touched your heart, sit with it for a moment and take it with you for the rest of the week, because that's going to make all the difference, right? So Joshua, again, thank you so much. And we hope you'll be back again on Thoughtful Thursdays sometime soon. Good night, everyone. Have a great week. Be wise, be happy, be safe.